Wesley, as we approach Easter, why do you think Christianity is getting less popular as Islam is now the fastest growing religion in the world?
Yeah, I think there are a few kind of sociological factors that we can look at with that. I don't necessarily think that Islam is growing because of conversions. I think that Islam is outpacing us in terms of birth rate and immigration. So if we look at traditionally Christianized countries, the birth rates are lower. People in the West are having less children. And in fact, if you look at kind of the statistics of Christian growth, I think we're actually seeing a movement to the global south of Christian conversions, where in places like Asia and Africa, you're seeing a growth of Christianity and religious observance in that sense. Whereas you see a lot of the importing of Islam into Western countries. And so I wouldn't go as far as saying that Islam is growing because lots of people are converting. I would actually say that largely we're just being outbred in terms of the growth rates with people having children and the amount of people who are coming into places like the UK, the United States, Europe, and Canada that come from majority Muslim countries.
But someone like the UK, for example, I mean, church going has been, pretty rapidly reducing, I'd say, in terms of the general population now for several decades. People just don't go to church like they used to. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that we saw a shift when it was much more culturally acceptable, whether you truly believed in, say, a convictional Christianity or not, in decades past. You would just go to church. That was definitely true here in Canada. We even had laws like the Lord's Day Act, which made it illegal to open a business on a Sunday. And so there was just more of a cultural zeitgeist for Christianity. And as that waned, I think the cultural zeitgeist, it became much more comfortable for people to then not go to church and attend. So I don't think we actually saw a great kind of influx of people leaving the church as much as the people who were convictional Christians continued to go to church, and people who were more cultural Christians or Christians out of convenience, because that was just what you did within the overall day-to-day of society, those people left. And so statistically, it looked like there were a lot of people leaving the church, when I don't necessarily think that was the case. I think the culture moved and everyone else just kind of moved with the culture, and where once it was acceptable and just kind of more of the norm to go to and attend a church on a Sunday, when it was no longer the norm, those people just followed the norm of the society. I actually think we're seeing somewhat of a resurgence in that Bible sales have skyrocketed in the last couple of years. I think we're seeing individuals kind of come into the limelight and are bringing a Christian message in a much more overt way where we didn't see before. People who are popular, if they're not Christian, are bringing kind of a spotlight on Christianity. People like Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan, who I think are much more sympathetic to Christianity. And so, although I do think we've seen that cultural shift where it's just become less culturally acceptable to go to church, and so those people are no longer attending church, I actually think we are seeing, Pierce, kind of a grassroots movement that's very interesting in terms of people who might have been more interested in the new atheism 10 years ago, actually saying, hi, I think there's something about this Christianity thing, and they're doing things like reading the Bible or attending a church on Sunday when they otherwise wouldn't have.
I mean, there's no doubt, for example, that President Donald Trump, his faith was massively cemented. I think he's been quite open about this, by surviving an assassin's bullet last summer. And he talked about how he started praying more and everything else. And that, he's got a massive following in America, obviously, the big MAGA movement. Do you think that's been partly one of the reasons why you're seeing a resurgence of interest in Christianity in America, sales of Bibles and so on, when the president is out there talking in the way that Trump has been doing?
I think that's a possibility. I think we're probably seeing a multivalent issue going on, in that I don't know if there's any kind of one factor. I think there are convening factors. I think we live in a very tumultuous world where we're sort of the onslaught and prevalence of just the information online, is bringing attention to questions of meaning and purpose and morality. I think we're kind of coming to the end of our rope with some of the subjectivity of objective truth in this world. And I actually think that a lot of the seeds that were planted by the new atheists in the early 2000s ended up growing into trees that produced fruit that really didn't give any nourishment. And so I think people are seeing that, and we're seeing a resurgence at minimum of people who are becoming quote unquote spiritual but not religious, but also looking at what something like Christianity or organized religion has to offer and saying, huh, I think there's something there that actually can ground me, that I can plant my feet firmly on, rather than kind of the planting my feet firmly in midair that atheism was offering. But even though it was giving me maybe some superficial solace, it didn't actually give me the ability to say that I had objective truth and meaning and value.
You've seen the likes of Andrew Tate, a big influence on young men in particular, converting to Islam. Do you find that a convincing conversion, or do you think he's doing it for commercial reasons?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to think of Andrew Tate, because as someone who is very well aware of kind of the theological intricacies of Islam, he's sort of an anomaly in that he will give lip service to certain things within the framework of traditional Sunni orthodoxy within Islam, but then also kind of doesn't adhere to other ones. So I'm not really sure what to do with Andrew Tate. He's certainly not someone I would point to as a moral standard. Not that I think necessarily Islam is the place to look for a moral standard in general, but Andrew Tate is a bit of an anomaly, although, clearly risen to fame because he's so outlandish and a little bit more boisterous in the things